You might have heard of the word post in an API. So what does a post request do in an API, right? So what it does is it creates a resource in the API. Okay, you give it something, it creates that in the API, and most likely it's going to store that into a database. Okay, so your API is residing somewhere. All right, let's say it's in the cloud, it's in your local network. How do we interact with it? Okay, so first of all, for us to talk to that endpoint, we need to have a verb. All right, so a verb tells the API what actions to take. If you give it post, it's going to create. If you give it get, it's going to go and get a resource. All right, if you give it delete and put, it's going to delete and update respectively rather. Then we need to have the URI. Where does your code exist? Okay, so we need to give it a URI where that resource exists. In our case, we're going to use API/prescription. Okay, and in our context, the prescription is a controller, which you're going to see in code. And then what's the operation? The operation is we're going to create a resource. All right, the question is how? What do we need to create a resource? All right, we need to have something to create a resource, right? So you can say I want to create a prescription without giving it a prescription. All right, so APIs have a language which they understand, which they talk to each other. Same way I'm speaking English, you can understand. APIs also have a way in which they transfer information, and one of the popular ways that they do that is called JSON. All right, so we need to package our prescription in a way that our API understands, and this is usually JSON. There could be XML, you could use others which are custom to your company, but we're going to use JSON. Now JSON is simple. You will see it starts with an opening bracket and a closing bracket, and inside of this you've got key pair values, right? So you've got a key, its value, you've got a key, its value, and they are separated with commas except the last one. Okay, so in our case we have patient name, amount, and frequency. These are things that the API needs to get in order to create a resource. So we'll say patient name, we'll give it a name. So these three here, amount, frequency, they will be constant, but we'll be changing these things. So that's the information we need to give it to create, right? Then all we're doing here, what's the process? Okay, the process what we're doing here is we're trying to attempt to add this prescription to the data store. Could be a database, could be a cache, could be a file, whatever your data store is. Okay, but this is real life. You know, things could go wrong and things could go right. We need to anticipate for both things. So as we are making this prescription, we could either have a success or a failure. How do we handle those so that whoever is consuming our API has to understand that this has been a failure or a success? All right, so for success, what we do is we're going to return your newly created prescription. So whatever you've returned, we're going to give it. Now a response is a response body, which we'll see. So we're going to give it back to the user. All right, that's one. Two, we're going to return the resource in the header, the URI. So we'll show you where that resource also resides in the API. All right, and if something is successful in the API world, we use status OK, or it's in the range of 200. From 200 to 204, those are successful. So if things are successful, that's how we're going to handle it. If things fail, we're going to return errors in the range of the 400s. Okay, 400 is a bad request. It means it's something you did wrong as a client. You better check that out. 405 is not allowed. It could be a GET request and you're sending POST. It will let you know that that's not allowed. So a quick recap for those who might just be joining us. We've managed to do 2 endpoints, get all prescriptions and get a single prescription. So you might see this beautiful interface. It's called Swagger, Swashbuckle. It's built in with .NET Framework 6. It just helps us test our APIs right out of the bat, okay, without using a tool like PostMan or Insomnia and other popular API clients. So let's try first to see if it's still working. So there's the get. You're going to click get, then you're going to click try it out, then execute. So it goes and gets you your prescriptions. We've got 2 prescriptions, one for Jane, one for Door. It gives you whatever came back in the response headers, the bud itself. It gives you the code. 200 means it was successful. it shows you the request URI, all right, and it even shows you if you want to use a curl in your PHP, for instance. That's one. Let's try to get prescription by ID. There was 1 and 2, so we're going to try 2. If we hit, oh, it gets us a single prescription. So it tells us that was successful. That's your response body, that's your response header. All right, now let's try to get something that doesn't exist. Let's try 3. What do we get? It gives the 4 not found, and 3 there is the ID. Okay, and these are response headers. Well, you might be saying, well, but I'm used to PostMan. Okay, don't worry, I got you. So let's open up PostMan and see what happens. First of all, I like structure, so I use collection. So I'm going to create a collection. So click collection there. There's a plus button there. I'm going to call this collection prescriptions. All right, prescriptions. I'm going to enter, and our first, then I'm going to add a request. I click it, request. It's going to be a get request, obviously, because we have 2. I'm going to call it get all prescriptions. Okay, so first thing, you have to make sure it's get. You've got all those things, but we want get. Then it wants where the endpoint to that resource. So in our case, the endpoint, I'll just use, oh yeah, that's where this thing resides. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to press send. Wow, you notice that it gives you your body. So this is your response body. These are cookies. We don't worry about those things for now. Then the headers, these are the response headers which you saw there. Then here it's status. 200 means okay. It means you're good. Everything was fine. Now we want to get a single resource. So we're going to say add request. This would be get prescription. Get prescription. It's also a get request. Again, we're going to use the same, but in this case we want to get 1. So it wants you to put slash whatever ID you want. So let's use ID 1 in our case. If I send that, what do we get? So yeah, we get 1 John Doe. We get a 200 okay there. And if I try to put status 23, which doesn't exist in our case, we're going to get a 4 not found. So it is not found. There it shows you. Okay, this just returns the ID you give it. All right, so they all work. You just have to pick your point. Implement it in code. So for those who are new to this channel, and maybe this is your first video, I would recommend you check out the playlist on top. Click on top of the video or check the description so that you get a direction of where we are coming from. If you've been watching, then let's proceed. But I'm gonna do a quick recap so that we should get ourselves on our feet. Okay, so we said every API needs a database, right? So we went ahead and created a prescription database, right? We did a migration, right? So this migration was on a model which was our prescription, which basically has 4 columns there for the ID, the patient name, the amount, and frequency, right? And we agreed that this is what we're going to work with. Okay, so we need to have a place where we could group our functionality. We said we use the repository pattern to do that, which uses an interface. So our interface, if you go under the data model iPrescription repository, just dictates what it expects us to do the database, and we had 5 functions, as you can see there. And an interface just dictates. You have to inherit from it or implement it and give it the functionality. Okay, so if you go to prescription repository class under the same data folder, you see that we had implemented the get all and the get by ID, just 2 of them. Okay, now in this video we're going forward to create. Right, so how do you create an entry? So we need to implement that in our class. So for you to create something, you need to have a context, and we said this context will allow us to talk to a database. All right, so I want you to, all right, so you're going to say context. I want you to add on that context. Sorry, I want you to add on that context. What are you adding? A prescription, all right, which is this thing that it receives. Okay, So that's the prescription. So there you go, you're done. You've added the context, you've added the prescription to the context. But one important thing is missing, and that is one function that's important. Okay, I want you to call it bool save changes. So it's a boolean. Now you might wonder, what does it do? All right. Again, the moment we brought boolean, it means we have to go to our prescription repository to implement that. It will throw an error out of the bat. All right. So I want you to press control dot. Then it will ask you, are you going to allow me to implement? And I want you to implement. All right. So what we've done here, we've simply added the prescription to the context, but we have not persisted to the database. You see? So save changes enables us to persist to the database. So what you do is, I want you to return. Obviously, I have to return because there's a boolean there. I want you to return. So get the context and just say save changes. All right. Save changes is an anti-framework function that saves the changes, and I want you to check if it's equal to or more than 0, then that means you've saved. All right. Equal to or greater than. Which one comes first, guys? All right. So this one will be called to check if you've updated, right? Now, if you might recall, if you built with me from the start, we had an in-memory class that had used the same interface. So it's going to throw an error again because you have to also implement it, because it also adheres to that. But in this case, the exception is over here. We're not going to implement because we're not using it for this class. We used it earlier just to show that we can use at least an in-memory database. Okay, so just do that to avoid having errors going forward. So we have implemented our model, saying it's now going to be able to create a prescription, right? And we've had a function that actually does the saving. So what's next? The next thing is we need to find a way to get the prescription from the user. That prescription comes here, and once it comes here, we save it to our database. All right. But we said, you know what? We don't want people to give us the prescription because we don't want them to know the database schema which we have in hand. All right. Then we said we're going to have what we call data transfer objects, and these objects are just a mere representation of part of our data to the user. So the user will interface with that DTO, but they will not interface with our prescription directly. Again, one, we're trying to ensure safety, that they don't know. Two, there are some things that in our database they're different from what they see. For instance, our database might have first name and last name. For them, they just want one field called full name, which means that will be different. So in our case, we have to create a database, a DTO, a data transfer object. All right. So we have created a folder here called DTO, which we did a read DTO. So the read was what the user sees when they pull our data. All right. Now I want to create a create DTO. Okay. So under DTO, I want you to right click and say add class. That class will be called prescription create DTO. Okay. For those who are wondering, this source code will be available on Git. Check the description. So prescription create DTO. Right. So what should the user give us for them to save? Okay. So let's look at the prescription where we are trying to mirror from. What do we need from the user? ID? Not so much, because our database is auto-incrementing the ID. So we don't need the user to give us an ID. We're going to do it on our own. Again, see, it helps us. But we shall need the other three. All right. The ID? No. The other three? Yes. So we shall need the other three. So copy those and prescription create DTO, put them there. Okay. You might wonder, what are these required and max links? These are used when you migrate so that the database understands the language. Okay. Also, they are used for validation. If you put required here and the user who is sending us the prescription get DTO doesn't put this, it's going to throw an error. So again, .NET Framework 6 gives us validation outside of the box. Nice. Now we have created our create DTO, our create DTO, but somehow it's somewhere in space. It's not linked to our prescription. So what do? We can do it manually, or we can use a tool, which in our case we're using AutoMapper. So AutoMapper just maps your prescription and your prescription create DTO. All right. So we've got a class called profiles, and we have already a prescription read profile, but we want to create a prescription read DTO profile. Create DTO profile. So under profile, I click there and go to add class. Once you get there, I want you to put prescription create DTO profile. All right, there you go. And it has to inherit from the profile class, which falls under AutoMapper. This helps you to map, right? And this, it requires to have a constructor. So there's what we call snippets. So if you put CTOL and you tab twice, it gives you a constructor. And the rule of thumb here is source towards destination. Okay, so source to destination. Now, what is source? What's destination? You will note that what's our source in this? What comes first? So our prescription create DTO comes from the user. We get that, then we map it into our prescription, which our interface understands. All right. So our source in this case is our DTO. So I want you to say create map and give it your source. Your source is prescription create DTO. So control dot to bring it in, and your destination will be, yes, it will be prescription. Okay, control dot to bring it in as well. And I see there's something that just came out of heaven. It's fine. All right, so what you've done here is you've said any single time you use this, it gives you that, right? So you've mapped. Now these two things, they're in sync. All right, what's next? We've mapped. Now let's go to the controller where we are going to interface with the user. All right, under controllers, go to the prescription controller. Now we're going to create a new endpoint called post. So if you put HTTP post, we're telling the API, when somebody puts the word post in PostMan or in Swagger, hit this endpoint, right? So public action result. Now we said we want to return the object the users created plus where that object resides in our API, right? So it means, what do we return? If we return the prescription object, you are showing the user your database schema. That's a no-no. If you return the prescription create DTO, or the user will know the ID, that's a no-no. What makes more sense there is for you to use a prescription read DTO. All right. It might be confusing, but that's what you want to keep back the user. So the user wants to get back a prescription DTO. I want you to call this function create prescription, and it will take in what? If you can guess, congratulations, it's gonna get in a prescription create DTO, because that's what we'll be using for creation. Okay, that's one challenge out of the way now. But now we are getting a prescription DTO. We're trying to get a prescription, so that our database understands that. So we have to map here. All right. So I want you to have a prescription model. Okay, and we have AutoMapper injected here via dependency injection. If you don't know about that, check the description. There's a video on that, or just go through the whole playlist. So the mapper is going to give us access to the mappings. So you're going to say, I want you to map. So mapper.map. What's PA though? .map. You'll see there is destination there. There is source. So what's our destination? We want it to be, you guessed it, prescription. It has to be a prescription. Bring it in as well. And your source, where is it? Your source is whatever you're passing, the prescription DTO. Right. Okay, if for you to actually verify if you've mapped, if you go to the word var there, you'd see the word prescription there, and you've mapped. Now you've got your prescription. What's next? Well, let's create it. And we've got our depository there already injected, ready to be used to our service. So I want you to call there repository.create, and that takes in what? A prescription, which is whatever we've mapped here. All right, but we said if we just use create, we're just adding it to the context. We need to call another function called what? Another function called save changes. We have successfully mapped. Okay, so here I want to put a comment. Your mapping to persist to DB, but we ain't done just yet, right? Because we want to give back the user whatever they created. So we have to map, okay, from DTO, from prescription to its DTO. All right, so what you do is you're gonna create a function. You're gonna call it prescription read DTO, because now that's what you're going to give back the user, right? And I want you to map mapper.map. And it's interesting because what's your destination? Well, you want that to be a prescription read DTO, right? Where you're getting from? You're getting from that model you've created. I know this might be hard at first, but if you do it 2 or 3 times, come on, it becomes second nature. Sometimes you pause, you go back until you're comfortable. If you're not, comment in the comment and we're gonna get back. Now here we've what? We've mapped. What most developers do, they'll return a 200 here. They'll say okay, and they'll just return like that. Well, this works. It sends you back whatever you've created. But guess what? We are not like most developers. We are professional developers and we do things the right way. We have said if you have our API, we're going to give you back whatever you've created plus its location, okay? So I want you to remove this line, all right? I want you to do return, and I want you to say created at route, okay? Whatever I'm going to write here might sound broady, but it's going to make sense. So just say so call it name of. I want you to call it create prescription by ID. Should be not create, should be get. Okay. And I want you to go to give it an object on the fly with ID. Prescription DTO, this one, prescription read DTO.id, and I want you to give it the prescription DTO. I know you're like, man, what the hell? Let me explain. So what this thing does, it's created a route. The first thing is it'll give you back a 201 response, meaning a success. That's what we want. Second of all, it's going to give you the location of whatever you've created. Okay, but how do you get the location? Okay, that's where get prescription by ID comes from. Now think about it. Where did we use that? You're right. We have an endpoint that gets by ID. That one. I want you to change its name for the sake of clarity. It should be get prescription by ID. And I want you to go to the attribute there, and I want you to put comma and name and call it get prescription by ID. So what are we saying? We're saying we want you to call this method, right? And that method requires an ID. Okay, so this one here has an ID. So this method, so this name of is going to call that get function. Once it calls that get function, it's going to give it the ID. Then we get our location, and here we're just returning back that. Okay, enough of the code. Let's check it in our browser and see. Okay, so I'll press Ctrl F5. All right, so here we are. But before we add, let's see first what we have in our database, right? So under the get all, I want you to get all. So some of these I was adding them offline. The last entry is Josh, is ID 12. So we expect the next one to be ID 13, right? So without further ado, I want you to go to the post request, click on it, try it out, and you can see it takes, there's no ID there. So just like we want it to be. So person name is going to be Jonan, amount 200, frequency once a day. I'm going to click execute. Okay, so what happens? Well, we get 201. It's a success. It's a created. In our response body, we get back what we've created plus the ID. All right. Something important I want you to look at. Under response headers, there's a word location here. All right. This has a URL. It's telling you that's where we reside. Now copy that. Open up a new tab, and I want you to paste that in. Okay, and press enter. What do we get? We get Jonan, we get 200, we get frequency. Okay, so our API not only was able to create, it was able to let you know that for you to find that resource, that's where you find it. And this is what we call haters. Okay, I'll talk about it later on, but just know that we are able to navigate to find that resource without even looking at any documentation. It's just there. All right, so thanks a lot for this video. If you've been with me this far or even halfway, if you like the material, do like, comment, subscribe, share, and let's just get this rolling.